Ramon Rodriguez walked through the narrow alleys of the shantytown with an attitude of superiority that was completely out of place with the surroundings. His perfectly pressed police uniform was a brutal contrast to the peeling walls and crumbling alleys. With each step, he felt more powerful, as if these streets belonged to him. Residents, upon seeing him, either looked away or quickly retreated into their homes. Ramon interpreted this behavior as respect, but in reality it was fear. Fear of a man who abused his authority without a second thought. As he patrolled, Ramon reflected on his position. He firmly believed that he was there to maintain order, but his definition of order was distorted by prejudice and an insatiable hunger for power. Every corner he turned, every fearful glance he received, only reinforced his belief that he was untouchable. What Ramon didn't know was that his arrogance blinded him to the complexities of the community he had sworn to protect. His attitude was creating a growing gap between the police and the residents, fueling a vicious cycle of mistrust and resentment. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets of the shantytown, Ramon continued his patrol. He had no idea that his actions that day would have consequences that would shatter his perception of invulnerability. The soft hum of a powerful engine caught Ramon's attention as he turned to see a luxury car gliding through the narrow streets of the neighborhood. The vehicle, a shiny black sedan, seemed out of place among the simple homes and narrow alleys. Behind the wheel, a black woman drove confidently, skillfully navigating the winding streets. Her eyes were fixed on the road, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances of the residents and Ramon's intense observation. The officer felt a mix of surprise and suspicion rising within him. In his mind, the scene made no sense. How could a black woman be driving such an expensive car in that area? The incongruity between his expectations and the reality in front of him intensified his latent prejudices. Ramon watched the vehicle approach, admiring the luxurious details that stood out even more in the deteriorating atmosphere of the neighborhood. The alloy wheels gleamed under the setting sun. The leather interior was visible through the tinted windows, and the impeccable paint reflected the last rays of the day. The woman at the wheel was elegantly dressed in a tailored blazer and discreet but clearly expensive jewelry. As the car passed him, Ramon made an instant decision. His fingers closed around the whistle hanging from his neck, ready to sound the signal that would interrupt the driver's journey. Little did he know that that decision, based solely on prejudices and unfounded assumptions, would trigger a series of events that would change his life forever. Ramon brought the whistle to his lips and blew a sharp sound that echoed through the streets of the shantytown. He raised his arm, signaling the luxury car to stop. There was no real reason for the stop. No traffic violation, no suspicious behavior. Ramon's decision was based solely on his judgments and the mistaken belief that something was not right. As the vehicle slowed and pulled up to the curb, Ramon felt a surge of adrenaline course through his body. This was the kind of situation he loved, a chance to exert his authority, to show who was in charge on the streets of the neighborhood. In his mind, Ramon was already building scenarios. Maybe the car had been stolen. Maybe the woman was involved in some illicit activity. He didn't consider for a moment that she might simply be a respectable citizen minding her legitimate business. The officer adjusted his belt, making sure his gun was visible. He wanted his presence to be intimidating from the first moment. He began walking toward the vehicle with a stiff posture and his chin high in a show of authority. As he got closer, Ramon saw the woman's reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked calm, almost resigned, as if she had been through similar situations before. This calm, instead of calming Ramon, only irritated him more. In his distorted mind, he interpreted her calmness as a challenge to his authority. Reaching the driver's window, Ramon prepared to begin what he considered another demonstration of his power on the streets of the shantytown. Little did he know that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Ramon positioned himself next to the driver's window, his shadow projecting ominously inside the car. With a sharp gesture, he knocked twice on the glass, although it was already gently lowering. Her face twisted into an expression of contempt and superiority. License and registration now, Ramon growled, his voice laden with unnecessary authority. There was no salute, no explanation for the stop, just a harsh command designed to intimidate and establish dominance from the start. The woman behind the wheel remained composed. Her eyes met Ramon's with a calm that momentarily unnerved him. Without a word, she made her way to the glove compartment, moving slowly and deliberately, clearly to avoid alarming the already agitated officer. Ramon watched her every move with exaggerated suspicion, his hand ostentatiously resting on his pistol. "Faster," he ordered, impatient with what he perceived as deliberate slowness. The truth was that the woman was simply being careful, aware of the potential danger of the situation as she gathered the requested documents. Ramon took the opportunity to examine the car. His eyes scanned every corner, looking for something, anything, that would justify his unfounded suspicions. The luxury of the vehicle only fueled his irritation and prejudice. "Who would have thought a car like that around here?" he remarked sarcastically, his tone making it clear he didn't believe she could be the rightful owner. The insinuation hung in the air, heavy and offensive, but the woman didn't take the bait. Instead, she simply handed over the requested documents, her face a mask of unwavering dignity. Ramon took the documents in a sharp movement, almost ripping them from the woman's hands. His eyes quickly scanned the papers, looking for any discrepancies that might justify his suspicions. To his frustration, everything seemed to be in order. "This car, is it really yours?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief and contempt. "How can a—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, but his up-and-down gaze made it clear what he thought. "A person like you afford a car like that?" The woman took a deep breath, keeping her composure in the face of the veiled insult. "Yes, the car is mine," she replied in a firm, controlled voice. "I bought it with the fruits of my labor." Ramon let out a scornful laugh. "You work here in the neighborhood? What kind of job pays that much?" His insinuation was clear and offensive. Ignoring the provocation, the woman continued. "I'm a lawyer. My office is downtown, but I grew up here. I was visiting my mother." The mention of a respectable profession seemed to disconcert Ramon momentarily, but he quickly regained his composure. "And what would a lawyer do in a place like this? It doesn't seem like a suitable place for someone of your supposed level." Ramon's every word was laden with prejudice and arrogance. He couldn't conceive of anyone from that community having risen socially, much less a black woman. His limited worldview prevented him from seeing beyond his own biases. The woman, for her part, maintained an admirable dignity in the face of unfair treatment. Her calm and resolute presence began to unsettle Ramon, who hoped to provoke a more heated reaction to justify the arrest. Despite Ramon's growing hostility, the woman remained surprisingly calm. With smooth, controlled movements, she pulled a sleek leather wallet from her purse on the passenger seat. Unhurriedly but without hesitation, she pulled out her professional identification and handed it to the officer. "Here's my bar card," she said in a firm, businesslike voice. "As I mentioned, I'm a lawyer. My office is downtown, but I was born and raised in this community. I'm here visiting my family." Ramon took the document, a mixture of surprise and suspicion on his face. He examined the identification closely, turning it over several times, as if he expected to find some sign of forgery. The photo on the ID showed the same woman who was in the car, dressed in formal court attire. "This doesn't prove anything," Ramon muttered, more to himself than to her. But it was apparent that the situation was not unfolding as he had expected. The woman's calm demeanor and impeccable documentation were undermining his perceived authority. Sensing discomfort, Ramon decided to continue his abusive behavior. His face twisted into a grimace as he handed the documents back to the driver. "So a good counselor," he said, the title laden with palpable sarcasm. "That still doesn't explain what a successful lawyer would do in this dump visiting her family. Ha, surely she came to solve some problem, right? After all, we all know what kind of people live here." The woman took a deep breath, her patience clearly being tested. "Officer," she began, her voice still calm but with a growing firmness, "I understand that you are doing your job. I'm sorry, but your insinuations are offensive and unfounded. As I said, I came to visit my mother. She lives on the main street, in the blue house with the white windows." Ramon let out a scornful laugh. "Oh yes, I know that house. There lives a grumpy old woman who is always complaining about the police. Respect for authority must run in the family, huh?" What Ramon didn't know, and what he would soon learn the hard way, was that the grumpy old woman he was referring to was actually Doña Eleonora Silva, a respected community leader and, more importantly, the mother of the region's newly appointed police chief. The woman in the car, who up until that point had maintained an admirable composure, finally let a spark of emotion show. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of indignation and something that almost seemed like official regret. She spoke, her voice now laden with an authority that made Ramon shudder instinctively. "I think this conversation has gone on long enough. If there's nothing else, I'd like to continue on my way. I'm sure we'll hear more about this incident soon." Ramon, feeling that he had somehow lost control of the situation but unable to admit his mistake, simply made a curt gesture indicating that he could leave. As the car drove away, he could not imagine the storm his reckless actions had unleashed nor the consequences he would soon face for his prejudiced and abusive behavior. The next day, Ramon arrived at work as usual, his uniform impeccable, contrasting with the bored expression on his face. He did not yet know that his world was about to turn upside down. As he made his way to his desk, he was intercepted by a colleague with a serious expression. "Ramon, Captain Jones wants to see you. Now." The urgency in his colleague's voice sent a chill down his spine. The walk to the captain's office had never seemed so long. Ramon tried to keep his composure, but his mind was racing, going over every action of the past few days as he tried to guess the reason for the summons. Could it be about the stop he made yesterday? No, it couldn't be. He'd done everything right, or so he thought. Reaching the office door, Ramon hesitated for a moment. The name Captain Daddy Jones glowed on the gold plate affixed to the dark wood. He took a deep breath, adjusted his collar, and knocked 3 times. "Come in," came the deep, authoritative voice on the other end. Ramon turned the knob and entered. The office was spacious, but at the moment it felt stifling. Captain Jones sat behind his imposing desk, his piercing eyes fixed on Ramon. "Sit down, Officer Rodriguez," Jones said, pointing to the door. The officer sat down in front of him. His tone left no room for argument. Ramon complied, feeling his legs shake slightly. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Ramon knew something was very wrong, and he was about to find out just how much his actions had affected his future. Captain Jones leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his fingers interlaced in a pyramid shape. His serious face, with eyes as hard as steel, pierced Ramon, who squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. "Officer Rodriguez," Jones began, his voice low and controlled, but laden with an authority that made Ramon swallow hard. "I am aware of an incident that occurred yesterday afternoon, a traffic stop you made in the community of Villa Esperanza. Do you remember it?" Ramon nodded slightly, trying to keep a neutral expression. "Yes, sir, I made a routine stop. Nothing out of the ordinary." Captain Jones let out a heavy sigh, his disappointment almost palpable. "Nothing out of the ordinary, you say? Allow me to refresh your memory, Rodriguez. You stopped a vehicle for no apparent reason. You approached the driver in an aggressive manner and made inappropriate comments about his race and background." The words hit Ramon like a punch to the stomach. He opened his mouth to protest, but Jones silenced him with a sharp gesture. "Don't try to deny it, Rodriguez." Ramon felt the blood drain from his face as the silence became unbearable. He struggled to find words, anything he could say to defend himself. "But I didn't know," he began, but his voice cracked. "Exactly, Rodriguez. You didn't know. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know his story, and you certainly didn't bother to find out before making judgments based solely on prejudice. Jones concluded, his gaze fixed on Ramon, waiting to see some sign of regret or understanding. Captain Jones leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Ramon's face. The silence stretched on, broken only by the relentless ticking of the clock on the wall. Fine. Finally, Jones spoke again, his voice laden with a mix of disappointment and determination. Rodriguez, yesterday's incident was not an isolated case, was it? The question hung in the air, rhetorical and accusatory at the same time. I have been observing your behavior for some time, and what I have seen deeply concerns me. A chill ran down Ramon's spine. He thought his actions had gone unnoticed, that his authoritarian stance was seen as dedication to the job. Now he realized how wrong he had been. I have received numerous complaints about your conduct, Jones continued, flipping through a thick file on his desk. Aggressive stops, excessive use of force, discriminatory comments. The list is long. The captain began reading through some of the reports, each word falling like a hammer on Ramon. What he had dismissed as insignificant now took on new dimensions under his superior's scrutiny. It appears you have developed a pattern of behavior that goes against everything we stand for as a police force, Jones said, slamming the file shut. Your conduct not only tarnishes the reputation of this department, but it also erodes the trust the community places in us. Ramon tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he began to see his actions from the perspective of others, and the image that formed made him feel nauseous. I thought I was just doing my job, sir, he finally muttered. Your job is to protect and serve all citizens, regardless of color, social class, or address, Jones replied, his voice firm. What you have been doing is quite the opposite. You have been terrorizing and discriminating against those you swore to protect. The captain's words echoed through the room, leaving Ramon speechless. The reality of his actions, now laid out so clearly, began to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Jones warned that abuses of power would not be tolerated in his department. As Captain Jones stood, his imposing figure cast a shadow over Ramon, who remained seated, visibly shaken. Jones walked to the window, staring out at the street for a moment before turning back to the officer with a stern expression. Officer Rodriguez, let me be absolutely clear, he began, his voice firm. The abuse of authority you have demonstrated will not be tolerated in this department. Not now, not ever. Ramon opened his mouth to speak, but Jones cut him off with a firm gesture. I don't want to hear excuses or justifications. What I want is for you to understand the gravity of this situation. The captain continued. Every officer in this department not only wears a badge, but an immense responsibility. We are guardians of the law. We are not above it. Jones turned back to his desk, placing his hands on the polished surface as he leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Ramon. The power entrusted to us is not a right, Rodriguez. It is a privilege that can and will be revoked if abused. Captain Jones's every word was loaded with meaning. Your conduct not only violates the core principles of our department, but also betrays the trust the community places in us. The captain paused, letting his words sink in, as Ramon felt cold sweat run down his back. The reality of his situation was finally catching up to him. Your discriminatory and abusive behavior not only fails to fulfill that duty, but actively harms those we are sworn to protect. Ramon looked down, unable to sustain his superior's piercing gaze. Rodriguez, from now on, any hint of abuse of power, discrimination, or inappropriate behavior will be dealt with the utmost severity, Jones concluded, his voice rising slightly for emphasis. There will be no second chances, no looking the other way. Zero tolerance for any form of abuse. Are we clear? Captain Jones returned to his chair, sitting down with an air of completion, his steel-hard eyes fixed on Ramon, who seemed to shrink under the weight of that gaze. Now, Officer Rodriguez, we have reached a critical point, Jones continued, his voice serious and authoritative. Given the severity and recurrence of your infractions, drastic measures must be taken. Ramon felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew what was coming would not be pleasant. "From this moment on, you will be under constant surveillance," Jones stated, each word landing like a blow. "Every action, every stop, every interaction with the public will be monitored and evaluated." Jones opened a drawer and pulled out a small device, placing it on the desk in front of Ramon. "This is a state-of-the-art body camera. Technology. You will use it at all times during your shift. No exceptions." Ramon looked at the device with a mix of fear and outrage. "But Captain, isn't that a little extreme?" he asked, his voice filled with frustration. Jones leaned forward, his eyes flashing. "Extreme, Rodriguez? What's extreme is a sworn officer abusing his power and discriminating against the citizens he's supposed to protect. This is for your protection as much as the public's." The captain's tone left no room for argument. "In addition, your reports will be thoroughly reviewed. There will be random checks with witnesses and people you stop. Your fellow officers will be instructed to report any questionable behavior." Ramon felt the ground slip beneath his feet, the weight of constant surveillance crushing him. Jones' voice softened slightly as he continued. "Understand this, Rodriguez. This is not a punishment. It's an opportunity. An opportunity for you to prove that you can be the kind of officer this community deserves and needs. Use it wisely." Ramon nodded silently, realizing that his career, and perhaps his future, depended on how he navigated this new reality. As much as the captain's words weighed on him, a spark of indignation and wounded pride still burned in his chest. Gathering his courage, Ramon sat up straighter in his chair and attempted to defend himself. "Captain, with all due respect," he began, his voice shaking but gaining firmness, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding here. My actions have always been motivated by a desire to maintain order and safety in the community." Jones raised an eyebrow, his face a mask of skepticism. "Go on, Rodriguez. I'm curious to hear how you justify your behavior." Encouraged by the captain's apparent openness, Ramon continued. "Sir, the streets are dangerous. Sometimes it's necessary to be firm to show authority. If I seemed aggressive, it's only because I take my job seriously. As for yesterday's stop, well, the car seemed out of place in that area. It was my duty to investigate." Captain Jones listened quietly, his face impassive as Ramon finished. A heavy silence fell over the room before Jones shook his head slowly. "Mr. Rodriguez, your justifications not only fail to explain your actions, they also reveal the core of the problem," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You confuse authoritarianism with authority, and prejudice with caution." Ramon opened his mouth to protest, but Jones cut him off with a firm nod. "No, Rodriguez, there is no acceptable justification for discrimination or abuse of power. Your duty is to protect and serve all citizens, not to judge who seems out of place." The captain leaned forward, his eyes boring into Ramon. "Your failure to recognize the gravity of your actions only reinforces the need for the measures we are taking. Your explanations are not only being rejected, they are part of the problem." Ramon felt the last vestige of his defense crumble. He realized there was no way to argue against the truth that had been exposed to him. "From now on, Rodriguez, I expect to see action, not justifications," Jones concluded. "Show by your behavior that you understand the gravity of the situation, because your words so far have only shown how much you still have to learn." Ramon slowly rose from his chair, feeling as if he had aged years in the last few minutes. Captain Jones's final words rang in his ears as he headed toward the office door. "Remember, Rodriguez, every move you make from now on is being watched. Don't waste this chance at redemption." As Ramon turned the doorknob, he felt as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. The once familiar hallway of the police station now seemed like a minefield. Every glance from his colleagues, every whisper, every sudden movement, made his heart race. As he walked back to his desk, Ramon couldn't shake the feeling that all eyes were on him. Conversations seemed to lower in tone as he passed, only to rise again into muffled murmurs as he walked away. They all knew. How many of them had witnessed his inappropriate behavior over the years? Sitting at his desk, Ramon stared at the body camera Captain Jones had handed him. The small device, no bigger than a box of mints, seemed to mock him. It was a constant reminder that every word, every gesture, every decision he made would now be scrutinized. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ramon performed his duties mechanically, always aware of the camera on his uniform. Every interaction with the public, every call, every report answered, every report completed, everything carried an extra weight now. At the end of his shift, Ramon left the station feeling exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Paranoia consumed him. He imagined invisible eyes following him, judging his every move. Even at home, away from work, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Lying in bed that night, unable to sleep, he stared at the ceiling, wondering if he could ever escape the scrutiny that now defined his life. Ramon found himself on the brink of a life falling apart. The weight of his past actions, once buried beneath layers of justifications, was now crashing down with a force he had never anticipated. The constant surveillance imposed by Captain Jones had started as external control, but it quickly morphed into something deeper, an internal battle with his own conscience. Every decision, every prejudice, every abuse of power that had once seemed necessary now felt like a chain dragging him down. He was no longer just under the watchful eyes of his superiors, but also caught in the relentless scrutiny of his own guilt. The road to redemption was going to be long and arduous, and Ramon wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. As he sat across from Letitia at the dining table, the silence between them said more than any words. The years of love and companionship seemed to have disappeared, leaving only the empty remnants of what was once a happy marriage. The constant arguments, the cold stares, and the lack of intimacy were symptoms of a relationship on the verge of collapse. Ramon knew he was to blame. His decisions, both at work and in his personal life, had brought him to this point. Letitia, for her part, struggled to maintain a facade of normality, but her heart was broken. They both knew something had to change, but neither had the courage to take the first step. Ramon's heart raced every time he thought of Larissa. Their illicit encounters, full of passion and adrenaline, were an escape from the misery of his marriage. Larissa, his colleague Didi's wife, shared a connection with him that felt electrifying and special. They met in discreet hotels, exchanged coded messages, and stole moments together whenever they could. Ramon knew he was betraying not only his wife but also the trust of a friend. And yet, the thrill of the affair blinded him to the risks, justifying the lies and deception. Every day became a test of Ramon's nerves. He lived in a constant state of anxiety, fearing that a single misstep would expose his secret. At the police station, he avoided Didi's gaze, remorse eating away at him. At home, he lied to Letitia about overtime and non-existent commitments, the weight of his deception suffocating him. Every phone call, every glance from his colleagues, every whispered conversation plunged him into panic, convinced that his affair would be discovered. Then one morning, arriving at the police station, Ramon noticed a brown envelope on his desk. It was plain, with no return address, and nothing to distinguish it from other envelopes except his name written in bold capital letters. A chill ran down his spine. His hands shook as he picked it up, his heart pounding with the ominous certainty that what was inside would change everything. With a deep breath, Ramon tore open the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. An image of him and Larissa in an intimate embrace taken through a window of one of the hotels where they had met. The photograph left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Ramon's heart stopped. Someone knew. Someone had been watching them, and now he had proof. Panic gripped him as the reality of the situation sank in. His breathing became shallow, his hands sweaty. His mind raced, imagining the consequences. Who had sent the photo? What did they want? The foundations of Ramon's carefully constructed lies were crumbling beneath his feet. His world began to crumble that very morning. Shortly after finding the envelope, Letitia discovered his affair. Her fury was volcanic, and she confronted him with a rage Ramon had never seen before. The betrayal she felt was only matched by the mounting tension at the station. His colleagues, including Didi's, began to look at him with disdain. The foundations that once supported his career were disintegrating under the weight of his duplicity. Every familiar face now seemed like that of an enemy, every interaction a potential trap. Ramon was forced to maintain his composure, but inside, he was spiraling. The photo, hidden in his jacket, felt like a time bomb. His paranoia reached new heights as he analyzed each recent conversation. NT, every suspicious glance, trying to determine who had sent the photograph. Then the summons came. Ramon was summoned to Captain Jones's office. The walk through the station felt endless, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off the cold, sterile walls. His mind raced trying to decipher what this new meeting meant. As he reached the door, he hesitated. The fear of what awaited him on the other side paralyzed him, but there was no turning back now. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, Captain Jones sat with an expression that could pierce stone. "Sit down, Rodriguez," he said, his voice cold. Ramon complied, feeling the weight of the moment crushing him. Jones wasted no time. "I know everything," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Every abuse of power, every lie, every bribe. And yes, the affair." Ramon paled, feeling the ground crumble beneath his feet. The captain's voice dripped with disappointment. "I thought surveillance would make you change. I was clearly wrong." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ramon's mind screamed for a way out, a defense, but he found none. The truth was exposed, and there was no way to escape the consequences. Jones didn't pull out the termination papers. Instead, he leaned forward, fixing his gaze on Ramon. "You have two choices, Rodriguez. We can end your career here and now," he said, pausing meaningfully. "Or you can have a chance at redemption." Ramon, stunned, barely dared to breathe. "A chance?" he whispered. Jones nodded grimly. "One last chance to prove yourself worthy of doing the right thing. We have an operation underway," Jones explained. "It's a trafficking ring that has eluded us for months. We need someone on the inside." Ramon understood immediately. Infiltration. "It's dangerous, Rodriguez. Very dangerous. But it could be your salvation." Jones detailed the plan. Ramon would have to pose as a corrupt cop to gain the trust of Los Traficantes. "It's risky," Jones continued, "but it could be our only chance to dismantle this network. Do you understand, Rodriguez? This is your last chance. If you fail, there will be no turning back." His eyes bored into Ramon. "If you succeed, we might consider a new beginning for you." Ramon absorbed the weight of those words. It was an offer of redemption, but also an ultimatum. "There is no margin for error," Jones continued. "This mission will not only save your career, but it will prove whether you still have a place in this police force." Ramon ran through his options in his mind. The mission was dangerous, potentially fatal. If he was discovered, he would not only face the wrath of Los Traficantes, but also the abandonment of the police. His mind ran through scenarios: injury, torture, death. He thought of Sarah, of Clyde, and of his complicated life. But he also saw a chance to redeem himself. The risks were enormous, but the alternative seemed even worse. After a few moments of tense waiting, Ramon looked at Jones. "I accept," he said, his voice firm, despite the fear that consumed him inside. Jones nodded gravely. "It won't be easy, Rodriguez, but it's your chance to make a difference." Ramon felt a mix of terror and determination. This mission was more than a task. It was his last chance to redeem himself, to prove his worth not only to Jones, but to himself as well. Ramon entered the meeting room tensely. Jones introduced him to Noah Wisen, a veteran of the narcotics division. Noah, with visible scars and hard eyes, sized Ramon up. "So this is our guy?" he asked, skepticism evident in his voice. Ramon felt the weight of judgment, but he stood his ground. He knew he would have to prove himself not only to Jones, but to this experienced, distrustful man as well. Noah made no secret of his reluctance. "I don't like this, Jones. A corrupt cop for a sensitive mission?" Ramon felt his stomach twist at Noah's harsh words. "But if you say he's our best option," Noah sighed heavily. "Okay, we'll work together. But you've been warned, Rodriguez. One mistake, and you're out." Ramon was aware of the thin ice he was walking on. Noah spread maps and photos across the table. "This is what we know," he began, pointing out faces and locations. Ramon absorbed every detail, aware that his life would depend on that information. They talked about drug routes, cartel hierarchies, potential weak points. The complexity of the operation was overwhelming, but Ramon felt a growing determination. This was his chance at redemption, not his downfall. He spent days creating Am Reeves, a corrupt cop with a troubled past. He memorized every detail: difficult childhood, disciplinary problems, gambling debts. He practiced in front of the mirror, transforming himself into Am Reeves. His voice grew rougher, his walk more awkward. He was confident. Noah constantly tested him, looking for flaws in the story. Little by little, Ramon felt Am Reeves come to life, a mask that could save him or destroy his career. Ramon entered a dark world. Noah taught him about cartel hierarchies, codes of conduct, jargon. He learned about trafficking routes, money laundering techniques, danger signs. Nights were spent studying files, memorizing names and faces. The brutality of that world shocked him, but Ramon knew he needed to fully understand it to survive. Each new piece of information was a weapon in his arsenal. The first meeting was in a run-down bar. Ramon, now Am Reeves, met with a street vendor. His heart tightened, but his voice remained steady. They exchanged codes and discussed small business deals. Ramon felt suspicious eyes on him, testing his story. He remained calm, remembering every detail of his false identity. In the end, he achieved a small victory, an invitation to another meeting. The first step was taken. Noah set up intense simulations. Ramon faced aggressive interrogations, high-stakes situations, and bribery temptations. His performance was put to the test. There were moments of doubt when he almost broke character, but with each test, Am Reeves grew stronger. Ramon learned to control his fear and think quickly under pressure. Little by little, he won Noah's reluctant approval. He was almost ready for the real challenge that awaited him. After weeks of tense intrigue and grueling simulations, Ramon finally reached the heart of the trafficking network. As Am Reeves, he managed to gain the trust of the traffickers, infiltrating their most secret operations. Every move he made was crucial, and every decision was a step toward his redemption. In an operation meticulously coordinated by Jones, Ramon immersed himself completely in his role. The evidence he collected and the monitoring of the network culminated in a massive bust. The network was dismantled and the leaders arrested, thanks to critical information provided by Ramon. On the day of the trial, Ramon waited nervously in the courtroom of the police station, awaiting the resolution of his own fate. Jones approached with a more relaxed expression on his face. "You did well, Rodriguez. You have proven yourself." Ramon, exhausted but relieved, felt the weight of guilt and fear begin to fade. Despite the emotional scars and trials he had endured, the outcome was far brighter than he had imagined. He had regained his honor and saved his career. Jones offered him a new position in the investigations unit, a fresh start. Noah, though still reserved, offered him a smile of recognition and respect. Ramon accepted the opportunity with gratitude, eager to build a better future. Over time, he became an example of redemption within the force. The weight of the past gradually faded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and loyalty. Thus, Ramon found his way to a new life, full of hope and opportunities, eternally grateful for the second chance he had been given. What will you do if you were in Ramon's shoes? Have you done the same as Ramon? Or it could have been a different story. Let me know in comments. Thank you for watching the video. Hit the subscribe button so I can continue to make more video like these for my very special audience like you. Until then, take care and bye-bye.